For a long time, a big part of my identity was bachelor uncle. In my 20s and 30s, I had no kids, and my sister's two children, Chris and Laura, became the objects of my affection. I reveled in being Uncle Randy, the guy who showed up in their lives every month or so to help them look at their world from strange new angles. Sometimes this drove my sister crazy. It wasn't that I spoiled them, I just tried to impart my perspective on life. Once about a dozen years ago, when Chris was 7 years old and Laura was 9, I picked them up in my brand new Volkswagen Cabrio convertible. "Be careful in Uncle Randy's new car," my sister told them. "Wipe your feet before you get in it. Don't mess anything up. Don't get it dirty." I listened to her and thought, as only a bachelor uncle can, that's just the sort of admonition that sets kids up for failure. Of course they'd eventually get my car dirty. Kids can't help it. So I made things easy. While my sister was outlining the rules, I slowly and deliberately opened a can of soda, turned it over, and poured it on the cloth seats in the back of the convertible. My message? People are more important than things. A car, even a pristine gem like my new convertible, was just a thing. As I poured out that Coke, I watched Chris and Laura's mouths open, eyes widening. Here was crazy Uncle Randy completely rejecting adult rules. I ended up being so glad I'd spilled that soda, because later in the weekend, little Chris got the flu and threw up all over the back seat. He didn't feel guilty. He was relieved. He had already watched me christen the car, and he knew it would be okay. Whenever the kids were with me, we had just two rules. Number 1, no whining. Number 2, whatever we do together, don't tell Mom. Not telling Mom made everything we did into a pirate adventure. Even the mundane could feel magical. On most weekends, Chris and Laura would hang out at my apartment, and I'd take them to Chuck E. Cheese, or we'd head out for a hike or visit a museum. On special weekends, we'd stay at a hotel with a pool. The three of us liked making pancakes together. My father had always said, "Why do pancakes need to be round?" I'd asked the same question, and so we were always making weirdly shaped animal pancakes. There's a sloppiness to that medium that I like, because every animal pancake you make is an unintentional Rorschach test. Chris and Laura would say, "This isn't the shape of animal I wanted," but that allowed us to look at the pancake as it was and imagine what animal it might be. I've watched Laura and Chris grow into terrific young adults. She's now 21, he's 19. These days, I am more grateful than ever that I was part of their childhood, because I've come to realize something. It's unlikely that I will ever get to be the father of children over the age of 6. So my time with Chris and Laura has become even more precious. They gave me a gift of being a presence in their lives through their preteen and teen years into adulthood. Recently, I asked both Chris and Laura to do me a favor. After I die, I want them to take my kids for the weekends here and there and, just do stuff. Anything fun they can think of. They don't have to do the exact things we did together. They can let my kids take the lead. Dylan likes dinosaurs. Maybe Chris and Laura can take him to the Natural History Museum. Logan likes sports. Maybe they can take him to see the Steelers. And Chloe loves to dance. Well, they'll figure something out. I also want my niece and nephew to tell my kids a few things. First, they can say simply, "Your dad asked us to spend this time with you, just like he spent time with us." I hope they'll also explain to my kids how hard I fought to stay alive. I signed up for the hardest treatments that could be thrown at me because I wanted to be around as long as possible to be there for my kids. That's the message I've asked Laura and Chris to deliver. Oh, and one more thing. If my kids mess up their cars, I hope Chris and Laura will think of me and smile. Chapter 16. Romancing the Brick Wall. The most formidable brick wall I ever came upon in my life was just 5 feet 6 inches tall and was absolutely beautiful. But it reduced me to tears, made me reevaluate my entire life, and led me to call her father in a helpless fit to ask for guidance on how to scale it. That brick wall was Jay. As I said in the lecture, I was always pretty adept at charging through the brick walls in my academic and professional life. I didn't tell the audience the story about my courtship with my wife because I knew I'd get too emotional. Still, the words I said on stage completely applied to my early days with Jay. The brick walls are there to stop people who don't want it badly enough. They're there to stop the other people. I was 37-year-old bachelor when Jay and I met. I spent a lot of time dating around and having great fun and then losing girlfriends who wanted to get more serious. For years, I felt no compulsion to settle down. Even as a tenured professor who could afford something better, I lived in a $450 a month attic apartment with a fire escape walk-up. It was a place my grad students wouldn't live in because it was beneath them, but it was perfect for me. A friend once asked me, "What kind of woman do you think would be impressed if you brought her back to this place?" I replied, "The right kind." But who was I kidding? I was a fun-loving workaholic Peter Pan with mental folding chairs in my dining room. No woman, even the right kind, would expect to settle down blissfully into that. And when Jay finally arrived in my life, neither did she. Granted, I had a good job and other things going for me, but I wasn't any woman's idea of a perfect marriage material. I met Jay in the fall of 1998 when I was invited to give a lecture on virtual reality technology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Jay, then a 31-year-old grad student in comparative literature, was working part-time at the UNC Computer Science Department. Her job was to host visitors who came to the labs, whether Nobel laureates or Girl Scout troops. On this particular day, her job was to host me. Jay had seen me speak the previous summer at a computer graphics conference in Orlando. She later told me that she had considered coming up to me afterwards to introduce herself, but she never did. When she learned she'd be my host when I came to UNC, she visited my website to learn more about me. She clicked through all my academic stuff and then found the links to my funkier personal information, what my hobbies were, making gingerbread houses and sewing. She saw my age, no mention of a wife or girlfriend, but lots of photos of my niece and nephew. She figured I obviously was pretty offbeat and interesting guy, and she was intrigued enough to make a few phone calls to friends of hers in the computer science community. "What do you know about Randy Pausch?" she asked. "Is he gay?" She was told I was not gay. In fact, she was told I had a reputation as a player who'd never settled down. Well, to the extent that a computer scientist can be considered a player. As for Jay, she had been married briefly to her college sweetheart, and after that ended in divorce with no children, she was gun-shy about getting serious again. From the moment I met her the day of my visit, I just found myself staring at her. She's a beauty, of course, and she has this gorgeous long hair then, and this smile that said a lot about both her warmth and her impishness. I was brought into the lab to watch students demonstrate their virtual reality projects, and I had trouble concentrating on any of them because Jay was standing there. Soon enough, I was flirting pretty aggressively because this was a professional setting. That meant I was making far more eye contact than was appropriate. Jay told me later, "I couldn't tell if you did that with everyone or if you were just signaling me out." Believe me, I was signaling. At one point during the day, Jay sat down with me to ask questions about bringing software projects to UNC. By then, I was completely taken with her. I had to go to a formal faculty dinner that night, but I asked if she'd meet me for a drink afterward. She agreed. I couldn't concentrate during dinner. I wished all of those tenured professors would just chew faster. Convinced everyone not to order dessert, and I got out of there at 8:30 and called Jay. We went to a wine bar, even though I don't really drink, and I quickly felt a magnetic sense that I really wanted to be with this woman. I was scheduled to take a flight home the next morning, but I told her I'd change it if she'd go on a date with me the following day. She said yes, and we ended up having a terrific time. After I returned to Pittsburgh, I offered her my frequent flyer miles and asked her to visit me. She had obvious feelings for me, but she was scared of both my reputation and the possibility that she was falling in love. "I'm not coming," she wrote in an email. "I've thought it through, and I'm not looking for a long-distance relationship. I'm sorry." I was hooked, of course, and this was a brick wall I thought I could manage. I sent her a dozen roses and a card that read, "Although it saddens me greatly, I respect your decision and wish you nothing but the best, Randy." Well, that worked. She got on the plane. I admit, I'm either an incurable romantic or a bit Machiavellian, but I just wanted her in my life. I had fallen in love, even if she was still finding her way. We saw each other most every weekend through the winter. Though Jay wasn't thrilled with my bluntness and my know-it-all attitude, she said I was the most positive, upbeat person she'd ever met, and she was bringing out good things in me. I found myself caring about her welfare and happiness more than anything else. Eventually, I asked her to move to Pittsburgh. I offered to get her an engagement ring, but I knew she was still scared and that would freak her out. So I didn't pressure her, and she did agree to a first step, moving up and getting her own apartment. In April, I made arrangements to teach a week-long seminar at UNC. That would allow me to help her pack up so we could drive her belongings up to Pittsburgh. After I arrived in Chapel Hill, Jay told me we needed to talk. She was more serious than I had ever seen her. "I can't come to Pittsburgh. I'm sorry," she said. I wondered what was in her head. I asked for an explanation. Her answer, "This is never going to work." I had to know why. She said, "I just don't love you the way you want me to love you." And then again, for emphasis, "I don't love you." I was horrified and heartbroken. It was like a punch in the gut. Could she really mean that? It was an awkward scene. She didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to feel. I needed a ride over to my hotel. "Would you be kind enough to drive me, or should I call a cab?" She drove me, and when we got there, I pulled my bag out of her trunk, fighting back tears. If it's possible to be arrogant, optimistic, and totally miserable all at the same time, I think I might have pulled it off. "Look, I'm going to find a way to be happy, and I'd really love to be happy with you. But if I can't be happy with you, then I'll find a way to be happy without you." In the hotel, I spent much of the day on the phone with my parents, telling them about the brick wall I just smashed into. Their advice was incredible. "Look," my dad said, "I don't think she means it. It's not consistent with her behavior thus far. You've asked her to pull up roots and run away with you. She's probably confused and scared to death. If she doesn't really love you, then it's over. And if she does love you, then love will win out." I asked my parents what I should do. "Be supportive," my mom said. "If you love her, support her." And so I did that. I spent the week teaching, hanging out in an office up the hall from Jay. I stopped by a couple of times, however, just to see if she was all right. "I just want to see how you are," I'd say. "If there's anything I can do, let me know." A few days later, Jay called. "Oh, well, Randy, I'm sitting here missing you, just wishing you were here. That means something, doesn't it?" She had come to a realization. She was in love after all. Once again, my parents had come through. Love had won out. At week's end, Jay moved to Pittsburgh. Brick walls are there for a reason. They give us a chance to know and show how badly we want something. I think this is my favorite chapter. Chapter 17, Not All Fairy Tales End Smoothly. Jay and I were married under a 100-year-old oak tree on the lawn of a famous Victorian mansion in Pittsburgh. It was a small wedding, but I like big romantic statements, and so Jay and I agreed to start our marriage in a special way. We did not leave the reception in a car with cans rattling from the rear bumper. We did not get into a horse-drawn carriage. Instead, we got into a huge multicolored hot air balloon that whisked us off into the clouds as our friends and loved ones waved up to us, wishing us bon voyage. What a Kodak moment! When we had stepped into the balloon, Jay was just beaming. "It's like a fairy tale ending to a Disney movie," she said. Then the balloon smashed through tree branches on the way up. It didn't sound like the destruction of the Hindenburg, but it was a little disconcerting. "No problem," said the man flying the balloon. He's called the ballooner. "Usually, we're okay going through branches." Usually? We had also taken off a little later than scheduled, and the ballooner said that could make things harder because it was getting dark, and the winds had shifted. "I can't really control where we go. We're at the mercy of the winds," he said, "but we should be okay." The balloon traveled over urban Pittsburgh, back and forth of the city's famous three rivers. This was not where the ballooner wanted to be, and I could see he was worried. "There's no place to put this bird down," he said, almost to himself, then to us. "We've got to keep looking." The newlyweds were no longer enjoying the view. We were all looking for a large open space hidden in an urban landscape. Finally, we floated into the suburbs, and the ballooner spotted a big field off in the distance. He committed to putting the balloon down in it. "This should work," he said, and he started descending fast. I looked down at the field. It appeared to be fairly large, but I noticed there was a train track at the edge of it. My eyes followed the track. A train was coming. At that moment, I was no longer a groom. I was an engineer, and I said to the ballooner, "Sir, I think I see a variable here." "A variable? Is that what you computer guys call a problem?" he asked. "Well, yes. What if we hit the train?" He answered honestly. We were in the basket of the balloon, and the odds of the basket hitting the train were small. However, there was certainly a risk that the giant balloon itself, called the envelope, could fall onto the tracks when we hit the ground. If the speeding train got tangled in the falling envelope, we'd be at the wrong end of the rope, inside a basket getting dragged. In that case, great bodily harm was not just possible, but probable. "When this thing hits the ground, run as fast as you can," the ballooner said. These are not the words most brides dream about hearing on their wedding day. In short, Jay was no longer feeling like a Disney princess, and I was already seeing myself as a character in a disaster movie, thinking of how I'd save my new bride during the calamity apparently to come. I looked into the eyes of the ballooner. I often rely on people with expertise I don't have, and I wanted to get a clear sense of where he was on this. In his face, I saw more than concern. I saw mild panic. I also saw fear. I looked at Jay. I'd enjoyed our marriage, so far. As the balloon kept descending, I tried to calculate how fast we'd need to jump out of the basket and run for our lives. I figured the ballooner could handle himself, and if not, well, I was still grabbing Jay first. I loved her. Him, I'd just met. The ballooner kept letting air out of the balloon. He pulled every lever he had. He just wanted to get down somewhere quickly. At that point, he'd be better off hitting a nearby house than the speeding train. The basket took a hard hit as we crash-landed in the field, hopped a few times, bouncing all around, and then tilted almost horizontally. Within seconds, the deflating envelope draped onto the ground, but luckily it missed the moving train. Meanwhile, people on the nearby highway saw our landing, stopping their cars, and ran to help us. It was quite a scene. Jay in her wedding dress, me in my suit, the collapsed balloon, the relieved ballooner. We were all pretty rattled. My friend Jack had been in the chase car, tracking the balloon from the ground. When he got to us, he was happy to find us safe, following our near-death experience. We spent some time decompressing from the remainder that even fairy tale moments have risks, while the collapsed balloon was loaded into the ballooner's truck. Then, just as Jack was about to take us home, the ballooner came trotting over to us. Wait! You ordered the wedding package. It comes with a bottle of champagne." He handed us the cheap bottle from his truck. "Congratulations," he said. We smiled weakly and thanked him. It was only dusk on the first day of our marriage, but We made it so far. Chapter 18. Lucy, I'm home. One warm day early in our marriage, I walked to Carnegie Mellon and Jay was at home. I remember this because that particular day became famous in our household as the day Jay managed to achieve the one-driver, two-car collision. Our minivan was in the garage and my Volkswagen convertible was in the driveway. Jay pulled out the minivan without realizing the other car was in the way. The result, an instantaneous crunch, boom, bam. What followed just proves that at times we're all living in an I Love Lucy episode. Jay spent the entire day obsessing over how to explain everything to Ricky when he got home from Club Babalu. She thought it best to create the perfect circumstance to break the news. She made sure both cars were in the garage with the doors closed. She was more sweet than usual when I arrived home, asking me all about my day. She put on soft music. She made my favorite meal. She wasn't wearing a negligee. I wasn't that lucky, but she did her best to be a perfect loving partner. Towards the end of our terrific dinner, she said, "Randy, I have something to tell you. I hit one car with the other car." I asked her how it happened. She had described the damage. She said the convertible got the worst of it, but both cars were running fine. "I want to go in the garage and look at them." "Want to go in the garage and look at them?" she asked. "No," I said. "Let's just finish dinner." She was surprised. I wasn't angry. I hardly seemed concerned. As she soon learned, my measured response was rooted in my upbringing. After dinner, we looked at the cars. I just shrugged. And I could see that for Jay, an entire day's worth of anxiety was just melting away. "Tomorrow morning," she promised, "I'll get estimates on the repairs." I told her it wasn't necessary. The dents would be okay. My parents had raised me to recognize that automobiles are there to get you from point A to point B. They're utilitarian devices, not expressions of social status. And so I told Jay we didn't need to do cosmetic repairs. We'd just live with the dents and gashes. Jay was a bit shocked. "We're really going to drive around in dented cars?" she asked. "Well, you can't just have some of me, Jay," I told her. "You appreciate the part of me that didn't get angry because two things we own got hurt. But the flip side of that is my belief that you don't repair things if they are still doing what they're supposed to do. The cars still work. Well, let's just drive them." "Okay, maybe this makes me quirky, but if your trash can or wheelbarrow has a dent in it, you don't go buy a new one. Maybe that's because we don't use trash cans and wheelbarrows to communicate our social status or identity to others. For Jay and me, our dented cars became a statement in our marriage. Not everything needs to be fixed." Chapter 19. A New Year's Story. No matter how bad things are, you can always make things worse. At the same time, it is often within your power to make them better. I learned this lesson well on New Year's Eve, 2001. Jay was 7 months pregnant with Dylan, and we were about to welcome in 2002, having a quiet night at home watching a DVD. The movie was just starting when Jay said, "I think my water just broke." But it wasn't water, it was blood. Within an instant, she was bleeding so profusely, I realized there was no time to even call an ambulance. Pittsburgh's McGee Women's Hospital was just 4 minutes away, and if I ignored red lights, which is what I did, we got to the emergency room. Doctors and nurses, other hospital personnel descended with IVs, stethoscopes, and insurance forms. It was quickly determined that her placenta had torn away from the uterine wall. It's called placenta abrupta. With the placenta in such distress, the life support for the fetus was giving out. They don't need to tell you how serious this is. Jay's health and the viability of our baby were at great risk. For weeks, the pregnancy hadn't been going smoothly. Jay could hardly feel the baby kicking. She wasn't gaining enough weight. Knowing how crucial it was for people to be aggressive about their medical care, I had insisted that she be given another ultrasound. That's when the doctors realized Jay's placenta wasn't operating efficiently. The baby wasn't thriving, and so doctors gave Jay a steroid shot to stimulate the development of the baby's lungs. It was all worrisome, but now, here in the emergency room, things had gotten far more serious. "Your wife is approaching clinical shock," a nurse said. Jay was so scared. I saw that on her face. How was I? Also scared, but I was trying to remain calm so I could assess the situation. I looked around me. It was 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Surely any doctor or nurse in the hospital's seniority list had gone off for the night. I had to assume that this was the B team. Would they be up to the job of saving my child and my wife? It did not take long, however, for these doctors and nurses to impress me. If they were the B team, they were awfully good. They took over with a wonderful mix of hurry and calm. They didn't seem panicked. They carried themselves like they knew how to efficiently do what had to be done, moment by moment, and they said all the right things. As Jay was being rushed into surgery for an emergency C-section, she said to the doctor, "This is bad, isn't it?" I admired the doctor's response. It was the perfect answer for our times. If we were really in a panic, we wouldn't have had you sign all those insurance forms, now would we? She said to Jay. We wouldn't have taken the time. The doctor had a point. I wondered how often she used her hospital paperwork riff to ease a patient's anxieties. Whatever the case, her words helped, and then the anesthesiologist took me aside. "Look, you're going to have a job tonight," he said, "and you're the only person who can do it. Your wife is halfway to clinical shock. If she goes into shock, we can treat her, but it won't be easy for us. So you have to help her remain calm. We want you to keep her with us." So often, everyone pretends that husbands have an actual role when babies are born. "Breathe, honey. Good. Keep breathing. Good." My dad always found that coaching culture amusing since he was about having cheeseburgers when his first child was born. But now I was given a real job. The anesthesiologist was straightforward, but I sensed the intensity of his request. "I don't know what you should say to her or how you should say it," he told me. "I'll trust you to figure that out. Just keep her off the ledge when she gets scared." They began the C-section, and I held Jay's hand as tightly as I could. I was able to see what was going on, and she couldn't. I decided I would calmly tell her everything that was happening. I'd give her the truth. Her lips were blue. She was shaking. I was rubbing her head and then holding her hand with both of mine, trying to describe the surgery in a way that was direct yet reassuring. For her part, Jay tried desperately to remain with us, to stay calm and conscious. "I see a baby," I said. "There's a baby coming." Through tears, she couldn't ask the hardest question, but I had the answer. "He's moving." And then the baby, our first child, Dylan, let out a wail like you'd never heard before. Just bloody murder. The nurses smiled. "That's great," someone said. "The preemies who come out limp often have the most trouble, but the ones who come out all pissed off and full of noise, they're the fighters. They're the ones who thrive." Dylan weighed 2 pounds 15 ounces. His head was about the size of a baseball, but the good news was that he was breathing well on his own. Jay was overcome with emotion and relief. In her smile, I saw her blue lips fading back towards normal. I was so proud of her. Her courage amazed me. Had I kept her from going into shock? I don't know, but I tried to say and do and feel everything possible to keep her with us. I had tried not to panic, and maybe it had helped. Dylan was sent to the neonatal intensive care unit. I came to recognize parents with babies there needed very specific reassurances from doctors and nurses. At McGee, they did a wonderful job of simultaneously communicating two dissonant things. In so many words, they told parents that, number one, your child is special and we understand that his or her medical needs are unique. And two, don't worry, we've had 1 million babies like yours come through here. Dylan never needed a respirator, but day after day we still felt this intense fear that he could take a downward turn. It just felt too early to fully celebrate our new 3-person family. When Jay and I drove to the hospital each day, there was an unspoken thought in both our heads. Will our baby be alive when we get there? One day, we arrived at the hospital and Dylan's bassinet was gone. Jay almost collapsed from emotion. My heart was pounding. I grabbed the nearest nurse, literally by the lapels. I couldn't even put together complete sentences. I was just gasping out fear in staccato. Baby! Last name Posh. Where? In that moment, I felt drained in a way I can't quite explain. I feared I was about to enter a dark place I'd never been invited to before. But the nurse just smiled. Oh, your baby's doing so well that we moved him upstairs to an open-air bassinet, she said. He's been in a so-called closed-air bassinet, which is a more benign description of an incubator. In relief, we raced up the stairs to the other ward, and there was Dylan, screaming his way into his childhood. Dylan's birth was a reminder to me of the roles we get to play in our destinies. Jay and I could have made things worse by falling into pieces. She could have gotten so hysterical that she'd thrown herself into shock. I could have been so stricken that I have been no help in the operating room. Through the whole ordeal, I don't think we ever said to each other, "This isn't fair." We just kept going. We recognized that there were things we could do that might help the outcome in positive ways, and we did them. Without saying it in words, our attitude was, let's saddle up and ride.